Hey, I'm Srini, host and founder of the Unmistakable Creative Podcast and the creator of Maximize Your Output with Mem. In this video, I'm going to show you how I use Mem to convert podcast transcripts into articles and blog posts. Before we get started, make sure you check out our free course on how to take smart notes with Mem. I'll include a link in the description below. Now, let's get to the video. So I wanted to share how I use Mem to convert podcast transcripts into articles. And you can read a lot of these articles on Medium. I'll actually include links to them. But one of the things that's problematic about transcripts is that they don't provide context to people who read them. And by converting transcripts into blog posts, not only are you able to repurpose that content and provide value for people who prefer to read rather than listen, it also forces you to revisit the things that you learn from a podcast. You end up externalizing knowledge, and then you can take that knowledge in new directions. So let's talk about how to do this. So what you'll see here is coincidentally a podcast transcript from my conversation with Sanka Ahrens about how to take smart notes. Now, the first thing that I will normally do is go through the transcript and look for standout quotes that I think on their own could be valuable. So like any podcast, obviously there's going to be a lot of conversation that may not necessarily translate into something that you can use for an article or something that is tactical or something that makes sense in the context of an article. So you can see here, one of the questions I asked was how Sanka discovered the whole Zettelkasten method and how to take smart notes. And so what you can see here is I actually ended up converting all this text into quotes inside of Mem. And then right above all those quotes, I actually create a bidirectional link. And then that becomes the foundation for the paragraph on the section about how he discovered the Zettelkasten. So let me go through, and you can see here that we keep doing this throughout, but every time I run across a quote that I think would be useful, I then create a bidirectional link. Again, this basically gives you the foundation for your article when you're converting a podcast transcript into an article. So you have all the paragraph headers and you know exactly what you want to write about. And you can see here there are a handful of things that I put in bold. Some of those were just for my own purposes. And then let me show you what happens when you start to convert this into an article. So let's just take one paragraph. The nice thing about this is that just the way that Mem works, you can actually do this in any order and then put these paragraphs back together in an order that makes sense so that it's something people can read. So we talked about storing information not requiring cognitive effort. So I took that one quote and I actually used that quote to write this entire paragraph. And because I already had a bunch of notes on how to take smart notes and a lot of the information that Sanka Ahrens shares, I was able to use a bunch of bidirectional links and bring in my own insights very quickly along with that one quote and convert this one quote into another mem, which makes for an entire paragraph. Now, if you go back and you'll look here, you'll see a couple of other things. You can see that I'm writing an interesting book there called Everybody is Full of It. But let's go back to one where I didn't necessarily have anything. So you can see here that I basically took what Sanka Ahrens said about his need for the Zettelkasten. I pared it down a little bit. And now I was able to, again, combine a bunch of different notes that I already had inside of Mem. So the final step of this process, and this is an article that is still in progress, but you can see here that I can quickly put this article together and then start to edit. So some of these I already had and some I didn't. So let's actually just use Mem Spotlight really quick. And we're going to bring in how Sanka Ahrens discovered the Zettelkasten. That's paragraph 1. And we're going to bring in our other note on the limitations of planning. And then we're going to bring in that last piece on storing information doesn't require cognitive effort. What you'll see here is that all of these headers were actually based on insights that I had from the transcript. So the transcript then becomes a much more dynamic piece of content because within that transcript, we can actually find all these different insights and we can start to convert those different headers into our own words and then weave in those different quotes. And so suddenly it becomes very easy to convert a podcast transcript into a full-blown article. And I'll include examples of other articles that I wrote using this process, but this actually makes podcast transcripts a lot more valuable for me personally. But even as somebody who just listens to podcasts, this is effectively taking smart notes on podcasts. So not only does it allow you to convert a podcast transcript, as you'll see here, into an article, but it allows you to get a lot more out of each podcast. And in the same way that you take smart notes on books, you end up taking smart notes on podcasts. And so you end up remembering what you learn in a podcast and retaining a lot of that information because you're rewriting it in your own words, you're retrieving it from memory, and you're not just depending on listening to the podcast and hoping that you might remember this. So this takes a little bit of practice. But what I would recommend for anybody who wants to try this is to transcribe an episode of a podcast, whether you're a podcast host or whether you're just a listener, and then go through and create a mem of the transcript, and then go through and add different quotes. Basically, find all the things that you look at as quotes that you want to remember, and then create a bidirectional link, and then rewrite the insight from that quote in your own words, and then weave in the quote, and then put them together using Mem Spotlight, and you'll be surprised how quickly you can convert a podcast transcript into a blog post using Mem. And as always, if you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. And as always, if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below.